They dumped a crippled man on her porch like trash and waited for her to break. What they got instead was a war they couldn't win. A widow with nothing left to lose and a paralyzed trapper with everything to prove turned humiliation into fury, and fury into a fortress the whole territory would remember. This is their story. If you want to see how far grit and rage can take two people the world tried to bury, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The auction block smelled like manure and tobacco spit. Evelyn Cross stood at the edge of the crowd with her arms folded tight across her chest, watching the men get bought and sold like livestock. She'd come into town because she had no choice. Winter was 6 weeks out, her fence lines were rotting, and her husband had been dead 4 months. The ranch wasn't going to survive on prayers and stubbornness alone, though she had plenty of both. "Lot 17, the auctioneer barked, and a broad-shouldered drifter stepped up onto the platform. Strong back, no complaints, works cattle and timber both. Bids flew. Evelyn watched the man get claimed for $8 a month plus board. She waited. She'd come here with $12 scraped together from selling her wedding silver, and she needed someone who could work harder than that money was worth. The next man went for $6, then $9, then $7.50. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected this many ranchers here, hadn't thought the competition would be this sharp. Around her, the other widows looked just as tense. Mary Hollis was chewing her lip bloody. Ann Pritchard kept smoothing her skirt like that would somehow make her look richer than she was. Lot 22. The man who stepped up wasn't a man so much as a corpse. Someone had propped upright and shoved into the light. His name was Gideon Hale, and Evelyn had heard it before. Everyone had. 3 years ago, he'd been a legend in the mountains, a trapper who could haul a bull elk on his back and track a wolf through a blizzard. Then a rock slide had crushed his spine and left him with legs that didn't work and a reputation that did him no good anymore. He sat slumped in a rough wooden chair, arms dangling, head tilted forward like he didn't care enough to lift it. His beard was wild and filthy. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been enormous, but now looked like something half-starved and hollowed out. The crowd went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet. The ugly kind. "Here's a curiosity," the auctioneer said, forcing cheer into his voice. "Gideon Hale. Can't walk, but he's still got his arms. And those arms used to swing an axe better than any man in the territory. Maybe one of you ladies needs some firewood chopped." Laughter rippled through the square. Not loud, but mean. The kind of laughter that stuck to you. Evelyn felt her stomach knot. "Do I hear 50 cents a month?" the auctioneer tried. Silence. 25 cents? More silence. Someone in the back coughed. A horse stamped its hoof. "Come on now," the auctioneer said, and his voice had gone sharp with irritation. "He's not dead weight. Man's got use in him yet." "Yeah," someone muttered, as a doorstop. The laughter came harder this time. Evelyn saw Gideon's shoulders twitch, just barely, like he'd flinched and caught himself halfway through. "All right," the auctioneer said. "If nobody wants him, we'll move him to the charity board and—" "Wait!" The voice cut across the square like an axe through kindling. Evelyn's voice. She stepped forward before she'd even decided to. Her boots hit the dirt loud enough that people turned to look, and she hated every single one of them for it. "I'll take him," she said. The auctioneer blinked. "Ma'am?" "I'll take him. Gideon Hale. I'm claiming him." The square went dead quiet again. And this time it wasn't mean. It was shocked. Someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the whole crowd started murmuring, and Evelyn heard every word even though they weren't trying to hide it. "She's lost her mind." Poor thing's desperate. What's she going to do with a cripple? Drag him around the yard for good luck? Evelyn's face burned, but she didn't move. She kept her eyes on the auctioneer until he cleared his throat and nodded. "All right then," he said slowly. "Evelyn Cross claims Gideon Hale. No fee required under the widow's provision." "Charity case gets a charity case," someone said, and the laughter rolled again. Evelyn turned and walked toward the platform. Her legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at Gideon either, not yet. She just climbed the steps, stopped in front of his chair, and finally met his eyes. They were blue. Pale, cold blue. Like river ice in January. And they were furious. "I didn't ask for this," he said. His voice was rough, low, and bitter as burnt coffee. I know, Evelyn said. I don't want your pity. Good. I'm not offering any. His jaw worked. For a second she thought he might spit at her. Instead he looked away, his hands curling into fists on the armrests of that sad, splintered chair. Let's go, Evelyn said. She grabbed the back of the chair and started pushing. The wagon ride back to the ranch took 2 hours, and neither of them said a word. Gideon sat in the bed with his back against the side rail, staring out at the hills like he was memorizing them for the last time. Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It just was. When they finally rolled up to the ranch, the sun was starting to sink behind the ridge. The house was small, 2 rooms, a stone chimney, and a porch that sagged on one side. The barn was bigger, but it needed new shingles and the door hung crooked. Beyond that were 50 acres of scrub grass, a dry creek bed, and a whole lot of nothing. Evelyn pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. This is it, she said. Gideon looked at the house. Then he looked at her. You really think this is going to work? He asked. No, Evelyn said, but I'm doing it anyway. She climbed down, walked around to the back of the wagon, and lowered the gate. Gideon's chair was heavier than it looked, and getting it down without dumping him on his face took some doing. By the time she'd wrestled it onto the ground, her arms were shaking and her breath was coming hard. Gideon didn't thank her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there with his hands on his knees, staring at the house like it was a cage. I'll get you inside, Evelyn said. Don't bother. You planning to sleep in the yard? Maybe. Evelyn wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Fine. Freeze if you want. But if you die out here, I'm not dragging your body anywhere. The coyotes can have you. She turned and walked toward the house. She made it 3 steps before she heard the chair creak. She glanced back and saw Gideon rolling himself forward, slow and awkward, his arms straining with every push. The wheels caught on a rock, and he cursed, low and vicious, but he kept going. Evelyn didn't help. She just waited. When he finally reached the porch, he stopped and looked up at the 2 steps leading to the door. Can't do it, he said flatly. Then I'll build a ramp. When? Tomorrow. And tonight? Evelyn studied him. Then she walked over, crouched down, and slid her arms under his. He stiffened. Don't? Shut up, Evelyn said. She hauled him up and half-dragged, half-carried him up the steps. He was heavier than he looked, all dead weight and rigid muscle, and by the time she got him through the door and lowered him onto the old cot by the fireplace, her back was screaming. She stepped back, breathing hard. Gideon sat there with his fists clenched and his face red. I didn't ask for that, he said again. I know, Evelyn said, but you're here now, so we're both stuck. She turned and walked outside to bring his chair in. That first night, Gideon didn't eat. Evelyn made beans and cornbread, set a plate beside him, and he didn't touch it. She didn't push. She ate her own meal in silence, cleaned up, and when she came back into the main room, the plate was still full, and Gideon was lying on his side facing the wall. She picked up the plate and scraped it into the scrap bucket. Suit yourself, she said. She went to bed in the back room and didn't sleep much. She kept listening for sounds, the creak of the chair, the scrape of boots that wouldn't come, anything that meant he was still alive out there. Around midnight, she heard him cough. That was all. In the morning, she got up before dawn and started the fire. When she came back inside with an armload of wood, Gideon was awake, sitting up in the cot with his arms crossed. You snore, he said. You stink, Evelyn said. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. She made coffee and set a cup on the floor beside him. This time he drank it. I need to know what you can do, Evelyn said. Gideon looked at her over the rim of the cup. Not much. Try harder. He set the cup down. I can use my hands, my arms. My eyes work fine. I can sharpen a blade, fix a saddle, probably shoot if you prop me upright. That's it. I can't walk, I can't ride, I can't work cattle or haul timber or do any of the things you actually need. Can you think? What? Can you think? Can you plan? Can you tell me when I'm doing something stupid? Gideon stared at her. Because here's the truth, Evelyn said. I don't know what I'm doing. My husband ran this place for 10 years and I helped, but I didn't run it. Now he's gone and I'm alone and winter's coming, and if I don't figure this out fast, I'm going to lose everything. So if you can think, if you can help me not be an idiot, then you're worth more than half the men in that town." Gideon was quiet for a long time. "You're serious," he said finally. "Dead serious." He looked down at his hands. "I used to trap," he said. "I know animals, I know weather, I know how to read land, and how to make things last when you don't have much." He paused. "But I can't do it from a bed." "Then we'll figure out how to get you moving," Evelyn said. "It's not that simple." "Nothing is. But we're doing it anyway." She stood up, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Gideon asked. "To build you a ramp," Evelyn said. "And then we're going to get to work." Chase. The ramp took her most of the morning. She wasn't a carpenter, and it showed. The boards were uneven, the angle was too steep, and halfway through she had to tear the whole thing apart and start over. By the time she finished, her hands were blistered, and she'd smashed her thumb twice with the hammer. But it worked. She tested it with Gideon's chair first, rolling it up and down to make sure it wouldn't collapse. Then she went inside and told him to try it. He looked at the ramp like it might bite him. "Go on," Evelyn said. He rolled himself forward, slow and cautious. The wheels caught on the edge, and he stopped. "Push harder," Evelyn said. "I am." "No, you're not. You're being careful. Stop that." Gideon glared at her. Then he shoved the wheels forward, hard, and the chair lurched up the ramp. It wobbled, tipped slightly to one side, and for a second Evelyn thought it was going to dump him. But he caught himself, corrected, and kept going. When he reached the top, he sat there breathing hard, his arms trembling. "There," Evelyn said. "Now you can get in and out on your own." Gideon didn't answer. He just sat there staring at the yard, and Evelyn realized he hadn't been outside, really outside, not just sitting in a wagon, since the rock slide. "You all right?" she asked. "No," Gideon said, but he didn't go back inside. The work started small. Evelyn brought him a pile of old tack, bridles with broken buckles, reins that needed stitching, a saddle with a cracked horn. She dumped it beside his chair and handed him a needle and thread. "Fix what you can," she said. Gideon looked at the pile like she'd just asked him to build a cathedral. "I'm not a seamstress," he said. "Then learn." She left him there and went to check the fence line. When she came back 3 hours later, he'd repaired 2 bridles and was halfway through a third. The stitching was rough, but it held. "Good," Evelyn said. "It's ugly." "It works. That's what matters." The next day, she brought him a box of knives that needed sharpening. The day after that, a broken axe handle that needed replacing. He complained every time, but he did the work. And slowly, something started to shift. His hands got steadier, his arms got stronger, and the bitterness in his eyes started to fade, just a little, replaced by something harder and sharper. Evelyn saw it happen and didn't say a word. She just kept bringing him work. 2 weeks in, she came back from the barn and found Gideon outside, rolling himself across the yard in slow, deliberate circles. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Building strength," he said. "For what?" "For when you need me to be strong." Evelyn felt something twist in her chest, but she didn't let it show. "Good," she said. "Keep going." That night they ate dinner together for the first time. Evelyn made stew, and Gideon didn't leave his plate untouched. They didn't talk much, but the silence was different now. Less sharp, less empty. After dinner, Evelyn sat by the fire and mended a shirt. Gideon sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood into something she couldn't identify yet. "Why'd you do it?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn didn't look up. "Do what?" "Take me. You could have picked someone useful." "I did. I can't even walk." "So?" Evelyn said. "Neither can a fence post, but it still keeps the cattle in." Gideon barked out a laugh, short, harsh, and surprised. "You comparing me to a fence post? If the boot fits?" He shook his head, but he was smiling, just barely. Evelyn went back to her mending, and Gideon went back to his whittling, and the fire crackled between them. The first real test came 3 weeks later. Evelyn woke up to the sound of something crashing in the barn. She bolted out of bed, grabbed the shotgun from beside the door, and ran outside in her nightdress and boots. The barn door was open. Inside, one of the horses was screaming, high and panicked, and she could hear something else, something big, moving in the dark. She raised the shotgun and stepped inside. A bear. Not a big one, but big enough. It had torn into the feed bags and was pawing through the grain, grunting and snuffling. The horse was backed into the corner, wild-eyed and shaking. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. She'd shot plenty of things in her life. Rabbits, coyotes, a wolf once, but never a bear, and never in the dark. She lifted the shotgun, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The blast lit up the barn like lightning. The bear roared and spun toward her, and Evelyn's blood went cold. She'd hit it, but not well. It was bleeding, angry, and coming straight at her. She fumbled with the shotgun, trying to reload, but her hands were shaking and the shell slipped through her fingers. The bear charged, and then a shot rang out from the porch, sharp, clean, and final. The bear dropped mid-stride, a hole the size of a fist blown through its skull. Evelyn spun around. Gideon was sitting at the top of the ramp, a massive rifle braced across his lap. Smoke curled from the barrel. "You missed," he said. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, the shotgun falling from her hands. Gideon rolled himself down the ramp and across the yard, slow and steady. When he reached her, he stopped and looked down at the bear. "You're lucky I'm a light sleeper," he said. Evelyn started laughing. She couldn't help it. It came out shaky and half hysterical, and she pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold it in. "Thank you," she said finally. Gideon looked at her. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to drag this thing out of your barn." It took them both, Evelyn pulling, Gideon pushing with his chair, and by the time they'd hauled the carcass into the yard, the sun was coming up. They sat there on the porch, covered in blood and dirt and bear grease, watching the light spread across the hills. "I think your chair needs a gun mount," Evelyn said. Gideon looked at her. "What?" "A gun mount. Something you can strap a rifle to so you don't have to balance it on your lap." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he grinned, a real grin, sharp and dangerous and alive. "Yeah," he said. "I think it does." And that was the beginning. The gun mount took Gideon 3 days to build, and he cursed through most of it. Evelyn watched him work from the porch steps, pretending to mend a torn flour sack, while he measured, cut, and bolted pieces of scrap iron together with the kind of focus that made the air around him feel sharp. He'd drag himself over to the pile of metal she'd scavenged from the old plow, study a piece like it had personally insulted him, then start filing it down with hands that didn't shake anymore. "You planning to actually use that thing or just stare at it?" Gideon asked without looking up. Evelyn blinked. "I'm working." "You've been holding the same needle for 10 minutes. She looked down at her hands. He was right. She jabbed the needle through the fabric harder than necessary and pulled the thread tight. "Maybe I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" "About whether you're going to blow your own foot off with that contraption." Gideon snorted. "Can't blow off what doesn't work?" The words came out flat, not bitter, and that was somehow worse. Evelyn kept sewing and didn't answer. She'd learned over the past few weeks that Gideon didn't want comfort when he said things like that. He just wanted the truth left alone. By the third afternoon, he'd finished. The mount was ugly as sin, welded iron brackets bolted to the arms of his chair with a swivel joint that let the rifle pivot left and right. He'd padded the brace with strips of leather so the recoil wouldn't crack his ribs, and added a release lever he could pull with his thumb. "Let's test it," he said. Evelyn set up a row of old bottles on the fence post 50 yards out. Gideon rolled himself into position, loaded the sharps, and locked it into the mount. His hands moved fast now, confident. He braced his shoulder, sighted down the barrel, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the air like a thunderclap. The first bottle exploded into dust. He fired again, then again. 4 shots, 4 bottles gone. Evelyn stared at the fence, then at him. "You missed one," she said, pointing to the bottle on the far left. Gideon reloaded. "That one's for you." "What?" "Shoot it." "I don't need to prove anything." "Neither do I. But you're going to need to know how to use this if I'm not around." Evelyn's stomach tightened, but she walked over and took the rifle. It was heavier than the shotgun, the stock worn smooth from years of use. She settled it against her shoulder the way her husband had taught her, aimed and fired. The bottle stayed intact. The fence post next to it splintered. Close, Gideon said. Shut up. She fired again. This time the bottle shattered. Gideon nodded. Better. Now do it faster. They spent the rest of the afternoon shooting until Evelyn's shoulder ached and her ears rang. By the time the sun started sinking, she could hit 4 out of 5 targets, and Gideon had stopped correcting her stance. You'll do, he said. High praise. It's all you're getting. Evelyn smiled despite herself. She handed him the rifle, and he locked it back into the mount, running his hand over the metal like he was checking for weaknesses. This might actually work, he said quietly. Might? I'm not making promises. Good, Evelyn said. I don't trust promises anymore. Gideon looked at her, and for a second something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. Then he turned his chair and rolled back toward the house, and Evelyn followed. The trouble started 2 days later. Evelyn was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard hooves coming up the road. She dropped the rake and stepped outside, wiping her hands on her pants. 3 men on horseback were riding toward the house, and she recognized the one in front immediately. Carl Drayton. He owned half the valley and wanted the other half. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and dressed like a man who'd never worked a day in his life but employed plenty who had. His horse was groomed to a shine, his boots polished, and his smile sharp enough to gut a fish. Mrs. Cross, he called out, tipping his hat as he reined in. Pleasure to see you. Mr. Drayton, Evelyn said. She didn't smile back. Drayton dismounted, and his men stayed on their horses, watching. One of them had a rifle across his saddle. The other kept his hand near his belt. I was passing through and thought I'd check in, Drayton said. See how you're managing out here all alone. I'm managing fine. That so? He glanced around the yard, taking in the sagging barn, the patched fence, the thin stretch of cattle grazing in the distance. Looks like it's been hard going. It's winter soon. Hard going's part of the deal. Drayton nodded slowly, like he was considering something generous. I'll be direct, Mrs. Cross. This land's too much for one woman to handle. Your husband knew that, and he had help. You don't. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer, enough to set you up somewhere easier, somewhere you don't have to break your back just to survive. I'm not selling. You haven't heard the offer yet. Don't need to. Drayton's smile thinned. You're a stubborn woman. And you're trespassing. One of the men on horseback shifted, his hand tightening on the rifle. Drayton held up a hand, and the man stilled. I'm trying to help you, Drayton said. Winter's coming, and you're sitting on a ranch you can't run with cattle you can't protect. You think you're going to make it through to spring on grit alone? I'll make it. With what? That cripple they dumped on you? Evelyn's jaw clenched. His name's Gideon. I know his name. I also know he can't walk, can't ride, and can't do a damn thing except sit in that chair and feel sorry for himself. You really think he's going to save this place? I think, Evelyn said slowly, that you should leave. Drayton studied her for a long moment. Then he shook his head, almost sadly. You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. He turned and climbed back onto his horse. His men followed suit, and for a second Evelyn thought that was the end of it. Then Drayton leaned forward in the saddle, his expression going cold. I'll come back in the spring, he said. And when I do, I won't be asking. He spurred his horse and rode off, his men flanking him. Evelyn stood there until the dust settled, her hands curled into fists. When she turned around, Gideon was sitting at the top of the ramp with the sharps across his lap. How long were you there? She asked. Long enough. You hear what he said? Every word. Evelyn walked over and sat down on the steps beside him. Her legs felt shaky, and she pressed her palms against her knees to steady them. He's going to come back, she said. I know. And when he does, it won't be with 3 men. It'll be more. I know that too. Evelyn looked at him. So what do we do? Gideon was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the rifle stock. We get ready. For what? For war. The next morning, Gideon laid out a plan. He had Evelyn drag the kitchen table outside and spread a rough map across it, lines scratched in charcoal on a piece of canvas showing the ranch, the creek, the ridgeline, and the road. He weighted the corners with stones and leaned over it, his finger tracing paths and points like a general planning a siege. Here's the problem, he said. Drayton's got men, money, and time. We've got none of that. So we use what we do have. Which is? This land. And the fact that he thinks you're helpless. Evelyn crossed her arms. I'm listening. Gideon tapped the creek. Water's your biggest asset. Drayton wants it because his land dries up come summer. If he takes this place, he controls the whole valley. That makes you dangerous to him, whether you know it or not. I know it. Good. Then you also know he's not going to wait forever. He'll move before winter while he still can. Probably sends men to scare you off first, burn something, spook the cattle, make it clear you're not safe here. And if that doesn't work? Then he comes himself with enough guns to make it permanent. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. So what do we do? Gideon pointed to the barn. We fortify. Make it harder for them to move fast. I need you to clear sight lines from the house to the road, cut back anything that gives them cover. Move the cattle closer so we can see if anyone tries to scatter them. And we set up watch points. Watch points? Places I can shoot from. High ground, clear lines, good cover. If they come at night, I need to see them coming. Evelyn looked at the map, then at him. You really think this is going to work? No idea, Gideon said. But it's better than waiting around to get buried. She believed him. They worked like the world was ending. Evelyn spent the next week clearing brush, hacking down scrub and saplings until her arms burned and her blisters bled. Gideon directed her from his chair, rolling from spot to spot and pointing out angles she'd missed. He was relentless, picking apart every decision she made until she wanted to throw the axe at him. That's not low enough, he'd say. It's fine. It's not. Cut it lower. I'm not cutting it to the dirt, Gideon. Then leave it and give them cover. Your choice. She'd curse, swing the axe again, and he'd nod. Better. At night, she collapsed into bed too tired to think, but Gideon kept working. He modified his chair, adding reinforced wheels and a brake lever so he could lock himself in place on uneven ground. He built a second rifle mount, this one detachable, so he could move the sharps to different positions without hauling the whole chair. And he made her practice shooting until she could reload in the dark. You're going to burn me out, Evelyn said one night, slumped against the porch rail with the rifle across her knee. Better me than Drayton. I'm serious. So am I. Gideon rolled closer, his face hard in the firelight. You want to survive this? You don't get to be tired. You don't get to be soft. You get to be ready, or you get to be dead. Pick one. Evelyn glared at him. You're a bastard. Yeah, Gideon said, but I'm a bastard who's keeping you alive. She hated that he was right. 3 weeks in, the cattle started acting strange. Evelyn noticed it first, cows bunching up near the fence line, skittish and wide-eyed, heads all turned toward the ridge. She walked out to check and found fresh tracks in the dirt. Boot prints. At least 3 men, maybe more. She ran back to the house. Gideon! He looked up from the knife he was sharpening. What? Someone's been on the property. He went still. Where? North Ridge, fresh tracks. Gideon's jaw tightened. He set the knife down and grabbed the sharps. Show me. They went out together, Evelyn walking and Gideon rolling beside her, the rifle locked and loaded in the mount. The tracks led up toward the ridge, then looped back down and disappeared into the rocks. They were scouting, Gideon said. For what? Weaknesses. Where you keep the cattle, where the house is, how many people they're dealing with. He scanned the ridge, his eyes narrowed. They'll be back. When? Soon. That night, Gideon didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with the rifle across his lap, watching the darkness like he could see through it. Evelyn tried to stay awake with him, but exhaustion dragged her under around midnight. She woke to the sound of gunfire. Evelyn bolted out of bed, grabbed the shotgun, and ran outside. The yard was lit by firelight. The barn was burning. No, she breathed. Gideon was already on the porch, the sharps thundering as he fired into the darkness. She saw shapes moving near the barn, shadows against the flames, and heard men shouting. Get down! Gideon yelled. Evelyn dropped behind the porch rail as a bullet whined past her head and punched into the doorframe. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her breath coming fast and shallow. How many? She shouted. 4, maybe 5. They're trying to scatter the cattle. Another shot cracked from the ridge, and Gideon swung the rifle toward it. He fired, and someone screamed. That's one. he muttered. Evelyn raised the shotgun and fired toward the barn. The blast lit up the yard and she saw a man dive behind the water trough. She reloaded, her hand shaking, and fired again. The man didn't move. "They're running!" Gideon shouted. Evelyn looked up and saw the shadows retreating, stumbling toward the ridge. Gideon fired twice more, and then the night went quiet except for the roar of the flames. Evelyn ran to the barn. The fire had taken the back half, the old hay bales going up like kindling. She grabbed a bucket and started hauling water from the trough, throwing it on the flames even though she knew it was hopeless. Gideon rolled up beside her and grabbed her arm. "Let it go," he said. "I can save it." "No, you can't. And if you try, you'll just get yourself killed." Evelyn looked at the barn, at the flames eating through the wood, and felt something break inside her. She sank to her knees, the bucket slipping from her hands. "They're going to take everything," she whispered. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Not if we take them first." She looked up at him. His face was hard, his eyes cold, and the rifle in his lap looked like it belonged there. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying we stop waiting for them to come to us," Gideon said. "We go after them." "How?" "By making them afraid, boss." The next morning, they found the body. One of Drayton's men had bled out behind the water trough, a hole in his chest the size of a fist. Evelyn stood over him, staring at the blood soaked into the dirt, and felt nothing. "We need to bury him," she said. "No," Gideon said. "We send him back." "What?" "We put him on a horse and send him back to Drayton. Let him see what happens when he sends boys to do a man's job." Evelyn's stomach turned. "That's smart," Gideon said. "That's what that is. You want them scared? You give them a reason." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. They dragged the body onto one of the horses, tied it down, and sent it back toward town. The horse wandered off into the morning light, and Evelyn watched it go with her arms wrapped tight around herself. "What now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Gideon said, "and we get ready for the next one." The barn was a total loss. Evelyn salvaged what she could: tools, tack, a few bags of grain that hadn't burned, but the structure itself was gone. She stared at the blackened beams and felt the weight of it settle over her like a stone. "I can't afford to rebuild," she said. Gideon rolled up beside her. "Then we don't rebuild. We adapt." "To what?" "To not having a barn." Evelyn laughed, sharp and bitter. "That's your solution? It's the only one we've got." She wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to make him understand that she was tired and scared and one bad week away from losing everything. But she didn't, because he already knew. Instead, she turned and walked back to the house. Over the next few days, the ranch took on a different shape. Evelyn moved the cattle closer to the house, penning them in a makeshift corral made from salvaged fence posts. Gideon built a second firing platform on the east side of the porch, giving him a clear line to the ridge. They stockpiled ammunition, water, and food inside the house, turning it into something halfway between a home and a fortress. And every night, Gideon kept watch. Evelyn tried to relieve him, but he refused. "I don't sleep much anyway," he said. "You need to rest." "I'll rest when this is over." She didn't argue. She just brought him coffee and sat with him sometimes, the two of them silent in the dark. One night, she asked him about the rock slide. "What happened?" she said. Gideon didn't answer right away. He stared out at the ridge, his hands loose on the rifle. "I got careless," he said finally. "Thought I knew the mountain better than I did. Turns out I didn't." "Do you regret it?" "Every day." Evelyn looked at him. "But you're still here." "Barely." "That's more than most people get." Gideon glanced at her, and something softened in his face. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I have to be." He smiled, just a little. "Good. You're going to need it." 2 weeks after the fire, Drayton sent a messenger. The man rode up at noon, hands raised, unarmed. Evelyn met him at the property line with the shotgun, and Gideon stayed on the porch with the sharps trained on the man's chest. "I'm not here to fight," the messenger said quickly. "Mr. Drayton sent me with a message." "Then deliver it and leave," Evelyn said. The man swallowed. "He says he's willing to negotiate." He'll pay you double what the land's worth if you leave by the end of the month. No trouble, no questions. And if I don't? The man hesitated. Then he says he'll take it anyway, and it won't be pretty. Evelyn stared at him. Tell Mr. Drayton I said no. Ma'am, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Now get off my land. The messenger turned his horse and rode off fast, and Evelyn walked back to the house. Gideon was waiting. You think he meant it? She asked. Every word. Then we're running out of time. Yeah, Gideon said. We are. That night, they started preparing for the worst. The preparations turned the ranch into something unrecognizable. Evelyn spent the first 2 days dragging every piece of scrap metal, broken lumber, and old wire she could find into the yard. Gideon sorted through it like he was mining for gold, pulling out hinges, nails, strips of iron, anything that could be repurposed. He worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, his hands moving fast and sure, and Evelyn learned not to interrupt him when he got like that. What are you building? She asked one afternoon, watching him bolt a piece of curved metal to the side of his chair. Armor, Gideon said without looking up. For what? For me. She stared at the chair. He'd already reinforced the frame with iron strips, added a second brake lever, and welded a shield plate to the front that could deflect a bullet if it hit at the right angle. Now he was adding side panels, turning the whole thing into a kind of rolling fortress. You planning to charge into battle with that? Evelyn asked. If I have to. You'll get yourself killed. Maybe, but I'll take a few of them with me. Evelyn didn't argue. She just went back to clearing the sight lines, hacking at the brush until her shoulders screamed and her hands were raw. Every time she looked up, Gideon was still working, his face set in grim determination. By the end of the week, the yard looked like a battlefield waiting to happen. They'd stacked barrels filled with dirt along the porch for cover, strung wire across the approach from the road to trip horses in the dark, and set up firing positions at 3 different points around the house. Gideon tested each one, rolling himself into place and sighting down the sharps, adjusting angles until he was satisfied. This might actually work, Evelyn said, standing beside him as he locked the rifle into the mount. Might, Gideon said. Or we both die and Drayton gets the land anyway. You're real good at encouragement, you know that? He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Just keeping it honest. Evelyn shook her head, but she was smiling. It felt strange, smiling when everything was falling apart, but she didn't stop herself. She needed it. That night, they sat on the porch with coffee and watched the stars come out. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting, and Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around herself. You ever think about leaving? Gideon asked. She glanced at him. Leaving where? Here. The ranch. All of it. Just taking Drayton's money and walking away. Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Every day? Gideon looked surprised. Yeah? Yeah, every morning I wake up and think about how much easier it would be to just give up. Sell the land, take the money, go somewhere I don't have to fight for every inch of ground. She paused. But then I think about my husband, about how hard he worked to build this place. And I think about Drayton and his smug face, and I just... She stopped, her jaw tight. I can't let him win. Gideon nodded slowly. That's a hell of a reason to stay. It's the only one I've got. He looked out at the dark hills, his hands resting on the arms of his chair. I used to think I'd die in the mountains, he said quietly. Figured that's where I belonged. Then the rock slide happened, and I thought I'd die in some charity ward, staring at a ceiling until my body gave out. He paused. Didn't expect to end up here. You regret it? No, Gideon said. Not anymore. Evelyn felt something warm and fragile unfold in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She just sipped her coffee and let the silence settle between them. The attack came 4 nights later. Evelyn woke to the sound of horses. Too many of them, moving fast. She grabbed the shotgun and bolted out of bed, her heart slamming in her chest. Gideon was already on the porch, the sharps locked and loaded, his face hard in the moonlight. How many? She whispered. At least 6. Maybe more. Evelyn crouched behind the barrels and peered over the edge. She could see them now, dark shapes moving up the road, spread out wide. They weren't trying to hide, they wanted her to see them. They're not playing around this time, Gideon said. What do we do? We make them regret coming here. The riders stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond rifle range. One of them spurred his horse forward, and Evelyn recognized the voice immediately. Carl Drayton. "Mrs. Cross," he called out. "I'm giving you one last chance. Leave now, and you walk away with your life and enough money to start over. Stay, and we'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." Evelyn's hands tightened on the shotgun. She glanced at Gideon, and he shook his head. "Don't answer him," Gideon said quietly. "Let him sweat." Drayton waited. When no response came, he raised his hand and his men started moving forward. "Here we go," Gideon muttered. The first shot came from the ridge, a rifle crack that split the night open. The bullet punched into the dirt 10 feet from the porch, and Evelyn flinched. "They're trying to scare us," Gideon said. "Hold steady." Another shot, then another. The men were firing wild, aiming for the house, but not hitting anything vital. Evelyn pressed herself lower, her breath coming fast. "When do we shoot back?" she asked. "When they get close enough that we don't miss." The riders spread out, circling the house like wolves. Evelyn tracked them through the gaps in the barrels, her finger tight on the trigger. One of them broke off and rode toward the corral where the cattle were penned. "They're going for the livestock," she said. "Let them," Gideon said. We've got bigger problems." 2 more riders dismounted and started creeping toward the house on foot, using the darkness for cover. Evelyn saw one of them trip on the wire they'd strung across the yard and go down hard, cursing loud enough to hear. Gideon fired. The shot roared out like a cannon, and the man on the ground stopped moving. The other one bolted, running back toward the horses, and Gideon swung the rifle to track him. He fired again, and the man dropped mid-stride. "2 down," Gideon said, already reloading. The riders scattered, firing back toward the porch. Bullets slammed into the barrels, the wood, the dirt. Evelyn raised the shotgun and fired blind, just to make noise, just to let them know she was still there. "Reload!" Gideon shouted. She fumbled with the shells, her hands shaking so bad she almost dropped them. By the time she got the gun loaded, Gideon had fired 3 more times, and the riders were pulling back. "They're retreating," Evelyn said. "Not for long. They're regrouping." Drayton's voice cut through the chaos. "Burn it!" Evelyn's stomach dropped. She saw 2 of the men light torches and ride hard toward the house. Gideon tracked the first one, fired, and the man went down. But the second one got through, hurling the torch onto the roof before wheeling his horse around. The roof caught immediately, old shingles going up like paper. "No," Evelyn breathed. "Forget the roof," Gideon said. "Focus on them." But Evelyn couldn't. She stared at the flames spreading across the roof line, and all she could think was that this was it. This was the end. They were going to lose everything. "Evelyn," Gideon's voice snapped her back. She looked at him, and his eyes were fierce. "We're not done yet," he said. "Get up there and kill that fire before it takes the whole house. I'll handle the rest." She hesitated, then nodded. She dropped the shotgun, grabbed a bucket, and ran inside. The smoke was already thick, choking, and she could hear the fire crackling overhead. She climbed onto the table, reached up, and started beating at the flames with a wet blanket, coughing so hard her ribs ached. Outside, Gideon's rifle thundered again and again, each shot steady and deliberate. She heard men screaming, horses panicking, and then the sound of hooves retreating into the distance. By the time Evelyn got the fire out, her lungs were burning and her arms felt like dead weight. She stumbled back outside and collapsed on the porch, gasping for air. Gideon was still in his chair, the rifle smoking in the mount. The yard was littered with bodies, 4 of them, maybe 5. The rest had fled. "They're gone," Gideon said. Evelyn looked at the carnage, then at him. "For now?" "Yeah, for now." They sat there in the smoke and the silence, and Evelyn realized her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't make them stop. The cleanup took all night. Evelyn dragged the bodies into the yard while Gideon kept watch, the rifle still locked in the mount. She didn't look at their faces. She couldn't. If she did, she'd start thinking about who they were, who they'd left behind, and she didn't have room in her head for that right now. By dawn, the bodies were lined up near the road, and Evelyn was covered in blood and ash. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her head in her hands. "We can't keep doing this," she said. Gideon rolled over beside her. "We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not for us, not anymore." Evelyn looked up at him. What if we lose? Then we lose. That's it? That's all you've got? Gideon's face was hard, but his voice was soft. You want me to lie to you? Tell you everything's going to be fine? It's not. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time, but we're still here, and as long as we're still here, we've got a shot. Evelyn wanted to argue, but she didn't have the energy. She just leaned back against the railing and closed her eyes. I'm tired, Gideon, she said quietly. I know. I don't know how much longer I can do this. You'll do it as long as you have to, because that's who you are. She opened her eyes and looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something halfway between respect and something deeper. You really believe that? She asked. Yeah, Gideon said. I do. 2 days later, a rider came from town. He wasn't one of Drayton's men. Evelyn could tell that right away. He was older, gray-haired, and wore a badge pinned to his vest. She met him at the property line with the shotgun, and Gideon stayed on the porch. Mrs. Cross, the man said, tipping his hat. Name's Marshal Briggs. I'm here about the trouble you've been having. Evelyn didn't lower the gun. What kind of trouble? The kind that leaves bodies in the road and half the county talking. Those men attacked my home. I defended it. I'm not here to arrest you, ma'am. I'm here to see if you're all right. Evelyn studied him. He looked tired, like a man who'd seen too much and didn't want to see any more. She lowered the shotgun slowly. We're alive, she said. That's about all I can say. Briggs nodded. I've been hearing things about Carl Drayton. Rumors, mostly, but rumors with teeth. You're not the first person he's tried to push off their land. Then why haven't you done anything about it? Because up until now he's been careful. Stays just on the legal side of things. Hires men who don't talk, and makes sure nothing sticks. But this, he gestured toward the ranch, the burned roof, the scorched yard. This is different. This is messy. And messy I can work with. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope, small and fragile. What are you saying? I'm saying I need proof. Witnesses, documents, something that ties Drayton to what happened here. You give me that, and I can shut him down for good. And if I can't, Briggs sighed, then I'd advise you to take whatever offer he's made and leave while you still can. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I'm not leaving. Ma'am, with all respect, you're one woman and a... He glanced at Gideon. You're not equipped to fight a war. We just did, Evelyn said, and we're still standing. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but if you're going to stay, you need to be smart about it. Keep your head down, don't provoke him, and for the love of everything, don't kill any more of his men unless you absolutely have to. Can't make any promises. Briggs almost smiled. Didn't think so. He turned his horse. I'll be around. If you need me, send word. He rode off, and Evelyn walked back to the house. Gideon was waiting. You trust him? He asked. Not even a little, Evelyn said. But he's the only chance we've got. The next week passed in a strange kind of quiet. No more attacks. No more riders. Just the wind and the cold and the slow creep of winter settling in. Evelyn kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it never did. Gideon used the time to make more modifications to his chair. He added a reinforced backrest, a storage compartment for ammunition, and a second mount for a pistol. He moved through the work with the same intensity he'd shown before, and Evelyn watched him transform from a broken man into something harder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. You're getting scary, she said one afternoon, watching him test the pistol mount. Good, Gideon said. That's the idea. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You think Drayton's given up? No, he's just waiting. For what? For us to let our guard down. Evelyn looked out at the horizon, at the ridge where Drayton's men had fired from. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Gideon, living like this, waiting for the next attack. You don't have to, Gideon said. We could leave, right now, pack what we can carry and disappear before he comes back. Evelyn turned to look at him. You mean that? Yeah, if you want to go, we go. I'm not going to make you fight a battle you don't believe in. She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I'm not leaving. You sure? I'm sure. Gideon nodded. Then we finish this. Ja. The storm rolled in 3 nights later. It came fast and brutal, the kind of early winter storm that buried the valley in snow and turned the roads into rivers of mud. Evelyn and Gideon spent the first day hauling firewood inside and sealing the gaps in the walls with rags and tar. By nightfall, the wind was howling so loud it drowned out everything else. They sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, and listened to the storm tear the world apart outside. Think Drayton's men are out there? Evelyn asked. Not in this, Gideon said. Nobody's that stupid. She hoped he was right. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the ranch was buried under 2 feet of snow, and the temperature had dropped so low that Evelyn's breath frosted in the air, even inside the house. We need to check the cattle, she said. Gideon looked out the window at the snow. You're not going out there alone. You can't come with me, not in that. Watch me. He rolled himself to the door, and Evelyn saw what he'd done. He'd fitted the wheels of his chair with makeshift treads, strips of leather wrapped tight and studded with nails for grip. It looked insane, but when he pushed himself out onto the porch, the chair held. You're out of your mind, Evelyn said. Probably, Gideon said. But I'm not letting you go alone. They made it to the corral together, Evelyn breaking trail and Gideon following in the packed snow. The cattle were huddled together, miserable but alive. Evelyn counted heads and felt a small rush of relief. They made it, she said. So did we, Gideon said. They stood there in the freezing cold, and Evelyn felt something shift between them. Something that had been building for weeks, maybe months, and couldn't be ignored anymore. Gideon, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said, for staying, for fighting, for... She stopped, searching for the words. For not giving up on me. Gideon's face softened. You didn't give up on me first. Evelyn reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, rough, and strong, and when he squeezed back, she felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They went back to the house together, and that night, for the first time since the fighting started, Evelyn slept soundly. The calm lasted 2 more weeks. Then Marshal Briggs came back. He rode up to the house at midday, his face grim, and Evelyn knew before he even spoke that something had gone wrong. Drayton's planning something big, Briggs said. I don't know what, but he's been pulling men in from all over the territory. Word is he's going to move before the end of the month. Evelyn's stomach dropped. How many men? 20, maybe more. Gideon swore under his breath. You need to leave, Briggs said. Both of you. Right now. I can get you safe passage to the next county, set you up with new names if you need it. But you can't stay here. No, Evelyn said. Mrs. Cross, I said no. Briggs looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You understand what I'm telling you? 20 armed men are going to ride onto this property and kill you both. There's no fighting that. There's no winning. Then we'll lose, Evelyn said. But we're not running. Briggs shook his head. You're a fool. Maybe, Evelyn said, but I'm a fool with a rifle and a reason to fight. That's more than Drayton's got. Briggs looked at Gideon. You going to let her do this? Gideon met his eyes. It's not my call, but if she's staying, so am I. Briggs sighed, long and heavy. Then you're both going to die. Probably, Gideon said, but we'll make it expensive. Briggs stared at them for a long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode off without another word. Evelyn watched him go, and when he disappeared over the ridge, she turned to Gideon. We're really doing this, she said. Yeah, Gideon said. We are. And for the first time in months, Evelyn felt something other than fear. She felt ready. The days that followed felt like waiting for an execution. Evelyn threw herself into the work with a kind of manic energy that kept her moving from dawn until she couldn't see straight anymore. She reinforced the barricades, hauled more ammunition into the house, checked and rechecked the firing positions until Gideon told her to stop before she wore herself out. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped, she'd have to think about what was coming, and thinking about it made her chest tight and her hands shake. Gideon, on the other hand, went quiet. Not the sullen, bitter quiet he'd had when she first brought him home, but something deeper. He worked on his chair with a focus that bordered on reverence, adding modifications that seemed excessive until Evelyn realized he was building something that could withstand a siege. He welded on thicker armor plating, reinforced the axles, added a third weapon mount, and fitted the whole thing with straps that would lock him in place even if the chair tipped. "You planning to roll into hell with that thing?" Evelyn asked one afternoon, watching him test the brake system for the 5th time. "If I have to," Gideon said without looking up. "You know it's not going to save you if they come with 20 men." "It'll save me long enough." Evelyn crouched down beside him. "Long enough for what?" He finally looked at her, and his eyes were calm in a way that made her stomach drop. "Long enough to make sure you get out. I'm not leaving you here to die. You might not have a choice." "Gideon?" "Evelyn." His voice was firm, not angry, but absolute. "If it comes down to it, if they break through and I can't hold them, you run. You take the horse, you ride for the ridge, and you don't look back. You understand me?" "No." "That wasn't a question." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I'm not running, not from this, not from you." Gideon stared at her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he reached out and took her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers with surprising gentleness. "I need to know you'll be okay," he said quietly. "That's the only thing that matters to me now." Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd been keeping locked down for months. She looked at their hands, at the calluses and scars and dirt, and realized she didn't want to let go. "Then don't die," she said, her voice rough. "Because I need you here. I need—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I need you." Gideon's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand. "Yeah," he said. "I know." They stayed like that for a while, sitting in the cold November air, and neither of them said what they both knew was true, that this might be the last quiet moment they'd ever have. The cold deepened over the next week, and the snow kept falling. Evelyn woke every morning to frost coating the inside of the windows and her breath hanging in the air like smoke. She'd build up the fire, make coffee that was more grounds than water, and sit with Gideon while they planned for a battle they couldn't win. "We need to think about angles," Gideon said one morning, spreading the charcoal map across the table again. "If they come from the south, we're exposed. If they split up and hit us from 2 sides, we're finished. So what do? We force them to come from one direction, funnel them into a kill zone." Evelyn looked at the map. "How?" Gideon tapped the road leading up to the house. "We block off the east and west approaches. Use fallen timber, rocks, whatever we can move. Make it so the only way in is straight up the road where I've got clear line of sight. That's a lot of work for 2 people." "Then we'd better start now." They spent the next 3 days dragging logs and boulders into position, building crude barriers that wouldn't stop a determined man but would slow him down enough to make him an easy target. Evelyn's back screamed, her hands bled, and by the end of each day she could barely stand. But the barriers went up, and the kill zone took shape. Gideon tested the sight lines from every angle, adjusting the sharps mount, the pistol rig, even the angle of his chair so he could pivot faster. He made Evelyn practice shooting until she could hit a target at 100 yards 3 times out of 5, and when she missed, he didn't let her stop until she got it right. "You're going to burn me out before they even get here," Evelyn said, lowering the rifle after the 50th shot. "Better burned out than dead," Gideon said. "I'm already half dead." "Then you're halfway to where you need to be." Evelyn glared at him, but she raised the rifle again. One night she asked him about the men he'd killed. They were sitting by the fire, and the question just came out before she could stop it. "Does it bother you?" Gideon looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Does what bother me?" "Killing them, Drayton's men, all of it." He was quiet for a moment, his hand still on the whetstone. "Yeah," he said finally. "It bothers me." "But you keep doing it, because the alternative is worse." He set the knife down and looked at her. "I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of hero, Evelyn. I've done things I'm not proud of, killed men who probably didn't deserve it, hurt people who were just trying to survive, same as me. But this?" He gestured toward the ranch, the barricades, the life they were fighting for. "This is different. This is worth it." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You really believe that?" "Yeah," Gideon said. "I do." She wanted to say something, to tell him what his presence meant to her, how much stronger she felt with him there. But the words stuck in her throat, so she just nodded and went back to staring at the fire. Gideon picked up the knife again, and they sat in silence until the fire burned down to coals. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Evelyn was outside checking the traps when she saw smoke rising from the direction of town. Not a lot, just a thin column that rose straight up in the still air, but enough to make her stop and stare. She ran back to the house. Gideon? He was already on the porch, the sharps in his lap, watching the smoke. I see it. What do you think it is? Nothing good. They waited, tense and silent. But nothing happened. The smoke kept rising, and the day dragged on with no sign of riders, no sound of gunfire, nothing. By nightfall, Evelyn's nerves were wound so tight she thought she might snap. This is worse than if they'd just attacked, she said, pacing the length of the porch. That's the idea, Gideon said. They're trying to spook us, make us jumpy, wear us down before they even show up. It's working. Then don't let it. Evelyn stopped and looked at him. How are you so calm? I'm not, Gideon said. I'm just better at hiding it. She almost laughed. Almost. The next morning, the smoke was gone, but something else had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like the pressure before a storm. Evelyn felt it in her bones, and when she looked at Gideon, she saw the same recognition in his face. They're coming soon, he said. How do you know? I just do. That night, neither of them slept. They sat on the porch with the rifles loaded and the fire burning low, watching the darkness for movement that never came. Evelyn's eyes burned, her body ached, and she kept nodding off only to jerk awake every time the wind shifted. Around 3 a.m, Gideon spoke. If we make it through this, he said, what are you going to do? Evelyn blinked, trying to clear the fog from her head. What do you mean? After. When it's over. What do you want? She thought about it. I don't know. I haven't let myself think that far ahead. Try. Evelyn looked out at the ranch, at the land she'd fought so hard to keep. I want to rebuild, she said slowly. The barn, the fences, everything Drayton tried to take. I want to make this place strong enough that nobody can ever threaten it again. That's a good goal. What about you? Gideon was quiet for a long time. I want to stop feeling like I'm already dead, he said finally. I want to wake up and not hate what I see in the mirror. I want... He stopped, his jaw working. I want to matter. Evelyn reached over and took his hand. You matter to me. Gideon looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Yeah? Yeah. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers, and they sat like that until the sun started to rise. The attack came on the 4th night after the smoke. Evelyn was dozing by the fire when Gideon's voice cut through the silence like a blade. They're here. She bolted upright, grabbed the shotgun, and ran to the porch. The night was pitch black, no moon, no stars, just thick cloud cover that swallowed the light. But she could hear them, horses moving slow and careful, trying to stay quiet. How many? She whispered. Can't tell yet. At least a dozen. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. What do we do? We wait. Let them get close, then we hit them hard and don't stop. She crouched behind the barrels, the shotgun slick in her sweating hands. The seconds stretched out like hours, and she could hear her own breathing, loud and ragged in her ears. Then the first torch flared to life. It came from the south, a bright orange flame that lit up the rider carrying it. Evelyn saw his face, young, maybe 20, scared but trying not to show it. More torches followed, spreading out in a wide arc around the house. They're going to burn us out, Gideon said. Can you stop them? I can try. He sighted down the sharps, his hand steady on the trigger. The rifle roared and the first torchbearer went down. The torch fell, sputtered, and went out. Chaos erupted. The riders scattered, shouting, firing blind into the darkness. Bullets whined past the porch, smashing into wood and stone. Evelyn raised the shotgun and fired, the blast lighting up the yard for a split second. She saw a man dive behind the water trough and fired again, lower this time, and he didn't get back up. Reload, Gideon shouted. She fumbled with the shells, her hand shaking so bad she dropped one. By the time she got the gun loaded, Gideon had fired 3 more times and 2 more riders were down. But there were too many. They kept coming, wave after wave, some on horseback, some on foot, all of them firing toward the house. Evelyn heard glass shatter as a bullet punched through the window behind her. Another one tore through the barrels, spraying dirt into her face. They're flanking us, she shouted. I see them. Gideon swung the sharps to the left and fired. A man screamed. Then he swung right and fired again. The rifle was smoking, the barrel hot enough to burn, but he didn't stop. Evelyn grabbed the pistol from her belt and fired at a shape moving toward the house. The man went down, clutching his leg. She fired again, and he stopped moving. How many left? She gasped. Too many. A torch sailed through the air and landed on the porch, flames spreading across the dry wood. Evelyn stomped it out, her boot smoking, and fired at the man who'd thrown it. He ducked behind a tree, and her shot went wide. Evelyn, fall back, Gideon yelled. No! That's an order. I don't take orders from you. She fired again, and this time she didn't miss. The man behind the tree dropped, and Evelyn felt a savage rush of satisfaction that scared her more than the bullets. Gideon's rifle cracked again, and another rider fell. Then another. He was firing faster now, barely taking time to aim, just pointing and shooting with a precision that shouldn't have been possible. But the riders kept coming. One of them made it to the porch, swinging a club at Gideon's head. Evelyn screamed and fired the shotgun point blank, and the man's chest exploded. He fell backward off the porch, and Evelyn stumbled, her ears ringing, her vision blurred. Behind you! Gideon shouted. She spun and saw two men climbing over the barricade. She fired once, twice, and one of them went down. The other one lunged at her, and she swung the shotgun like a club, catching him in the jaw. He staggered, and she hit him again, harder, until he fell. Her hands were numb. Her arms felt like they were on fire. She could taste blood in her mouth, though she didn't know if it was hers. They're pulling back, Gideon shouted. Evelyn looked up and saw the riders retreating, dragging their wounded with them. The yard was littered with bodies, and the smell of gunpowder and blood hung thick in the air. She sank to her knees, the shotgun slipping from her hands. Is it over? She whispered. For now, Gideon said. He was breathing hard, his face pale and slick with sweat. The sharps was still locked in the mount, smoke curling from the barrel, and his hands were shaking. You all right? Evelyn asked. No, Gideon said. But I'm alive. Evelyn crawled over to him and pressed her forehead against his knee, too tired to cry, too scared to move. Gideon's hand came down on her shoulder, heavy and warm, and they stayed like that until the adrenaline wore off and the pain set in. The sun came up on a battlefield. Evelyn counted 9 bodies in the yard, maybe more scattered beyond the barricades. The porch was scorched, the barrels shot to pieces, and there was blood everywhere. On the wood, the dirt, her hands. She sat on the steps and stared at it all, her mind blank. Gideon rolled up beside her. We need to move them. I know. Before they start to smell. I know. But she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the carnage, and tried to remember what it felt like to be a person who didn't kill. Evelyn, she looked at him. You did what you had to do, Gideon said quietly. That's all this was. It doesn't feel like that. I know, but it's true. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel justified, righteous, like she'd been defending her home and her life, and that made it okay. But all she felt was hollow. Come on, Gideon said. Let's get this done. They dragged the bodies to the edge of the property and left them there for whoever wanted to claim them. It took hours, and by the time they finished, Evelyn's arms were shaking and her back felt like it had been split in half. That's the last of them, she said, wiping her hands on her pants. Gideon nodded. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and gray, and Evelyn realized he'd been awake for 2 days straight. You need to rest, she said. So do you. I will, after I check the house. She went inside and found the place in shambles. Bullet holes in the walls, broken glass on the floor, the table overturned, but the structure was intact, and the fire hadn't spread beyond the porch. They'd survived. Barely. Evelyn walked back outside and found Gideon still sitting in his chair staring at the horizon. She sat down beside him, and they watched the sun climb higher in the sky. You think they'll come back? She asked. Not like that, Gideon said. We hit them too hard. They lost too many men. So what happens now? Now Drayton gets desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Evelyn leaned her head against the porch rail. I don't know if I can do this again. You won't have to. How do you know? Because next time, I'm not letting them get that close. She looked at him, and he looked back, and in that moment, she believed him. 2 days later, Marshal Briggs came back. He rode up slow, his hands raised, and stopped at the edge of the property. Evelyn met him with the shotgun, and Gideon stayed on the porch with the sharps. I heard about the fight, Briggs said. Yeah, Evelyn said. I bet the whole valley heard. 9 dead, maybe more. Drayton's men are saying you ambushed them. Evelyn laughed, sharp and bitter. They came here with torches and guns, and we're the ones who ambushed them? I'm just telling you what they're saying. Briggs shifted in his saddle. I also came to tell you that I've been digging into Drayton's business, and I found something. Evelyn's grip on the shotgun tightened. What? He's been using forged land claims, buying up property with fake deeds, then squeezing out anyone who fights back. I've got proof, documents, witness statements, all of it. Enough to put him away for a long time. Evelyn felt something flutter in her chest. You're serious? Dead serious, but I need one more thing. What? I need you to testify. Stand up in front of a judge and tell them what he did to you. Evelyn looked at Gideon. He nodded. All right, she said. I'll do it. Briggs smiled, tired but genuine. Good. I'll arrange for protection. You'll be safe. When? 2 weeks, maybe less. Can you hold out that long? Evelyn thought about the bodies in the yard, the blood on her hands, the exhaustion that had seeped into her bones. We'll hold, Briggs nodded. I'll be in touch. He rode off, and Evelyn walked back to the house. Gideon was waiting. You believe him? He asked. I don't know, Evelyn said, but I want to. Then we keep fighting, just a little longer. Evelyn sat down beside him, and they watched the valley stretch out before them, quiet and cold and still. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks? Gideon echoed. And they both knew it would be the longest 2 weeks of their lives. False. The days crawled by. Evelyn and Gideon settled into a routine that felt less like living and more like surviving. They ate sparingly, slept in shifts, and kept the rifles loaded at all times. Every sound made Evelyn jump. Every shadow on the ridge made her heart race. But nothing happened. No riders. No attacks. Just silence. It was worse than the fighting. He's playing with us, Evelyn said one night, staring out at the darkness. Maybe, Gideon said. Or maybe Briggs scared him off. You don't believe that? No, but it's nice to pretend. Evelyn almost smiled. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and let herself lean into the warmth of him. I'm glad you're here, she said quietly. Gideon looked at her. Yeah? Yeah. I don't think I could have done this alone. You would have found a way. You're tougher than you think. I'm not tough. I'm just too stubborn to quit. That's the same thing. Evelyn laughed, soft and weary. Maybe. They sat in silence for a while, and then Gideon spoke. When this is over, he said, I want to build you a new barn. Evelyn blinked. What? A barn. A real one, strong enough to last 100 years. You can't build a barn from a chair, Gideon. Watch me. She looked at him, and he was smiling. A real smile, not the bitter half grin she'd seen so many times before. And in that moment she saw the man he must have been before the rock slide, before the pain, before the world broke him. All right, she said. When this is over, you build me a barn. Deal. They shook on it, and Evelyn felt something warm and fragile take root in her chest. Hope. The 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4, and still nothing happened. No word from Marshal Briggs. No riders from town. Just the slow creep of winter settling over the valley like a burial shroud. The snow piled higher, the wind cut sharper, and every morning Evelyn woke up wondering if today would be the day everything fell apart. She tried to keep busy. There was always work, firewood to split, fences to mend, cattle to feed. But the waiting gnawed at her, wore her down until she felt like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Gideon felt it too. She could see it in the way he sat on the porch for hours, the rifle in his lap, watching the ridge like he could will Drayton's men into appearing just so he could get it over with. He slept less, ate less, and the hard edge that had made him dangerous was sharpening into something brittle. "You're going to break," Evelyn said one night, setting a plate of stew beside him. "Not yet," Gideon said without looking at her. "You need to rest." "I'll rest when it's done." "Gideon, I said I'll rest when it's done." Evelyn bit back the anger rising in her throat. She knew better than to push him when he got like this. So she picked up the plate, went back inside, and ate alone. Later that night, she heard him coughing, deep, rattling coughs that sounded like something breaking loose in his chest. She got up, grabbed a blanket, and went outside. He was still in his chair, shivering, his face pale in the moonlight. "You're freezing," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're half dead and too stubborn to admit it." She draped the blanket over his shoulders and sat down beside him. He didn't argue, just pulled the blanket tighter and kept staring at the ridge. "I can't stop," he said quietly. "If I stop watching, they'll come, and I won't be ready. They're not coming tonight." "You don't know that." "No," Evelyn said, "but I know you're going to kill yourself before they get the chance if you keep this up." Gideon looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw the exhaustion behind his eyes. "I'm scared, Evelyn." The admission hit her like a punch to the gut. She'd never heard him say it out loud before. "Of what?" she asked. "Of letting you down. Of not being enough when it matters." He paused, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "Of losing you." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She reached out and took his hand, and his fingers wrapped around hers like he was holding onto a lifeline. "You're not going to lose me," she said, "and you're not going to let me down. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It is." She squeezed his hand. "You are." Gideon looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face softened. "I don't deserve you." "Good thing I don't care what you deserve." He almost smiled. Almost. They sat there in the cold until Evelyn convinced him to come inside, and for the first time in days, he slept. Marshal Briggs finally showed up on a gray morning in mid-December, riding hard with 2 deputies flanking him. Evelyn saw them coming from the ridge and ran to get Gideon. By the time the riders reached the house, both of them were armed and waiting. Briggs dismounted, his face grim. "We've got a problem." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where Drayton figured out I've been building a case against him. He's pulled in favors, bribed a judge, and got the whole thing thrown out before it even went to trial." "What?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "You said you had proof." "I did. I do. But it doesn't matter if the judge won't look at it." Briggs ran a hand through his hair, looking older than he had a month ago. "He's untouchable, Evelyn, at least for now." Gideon swore under his breath. "So what are you saying?" Evelyn asked. "That we went through all of this for nothing?" "I'm saying you need to leave. Today. Right now. Drayton knows you were going to testify, and he's not going to let that slide. He's gathering men, more than before, and when he comes, it won't be to scare you off. It'll be to bury you." Evelyn felt the ground tilt under her feet. "How many men?" 25, maybe 30. "Jesus," Gideon muttered. "There's a wagon waiting in town," Briggs said. "I can get you both out of the territory, set you up somewhere safe. New names, new start. But you have to leave now." Evelyn looked at the ranch, the house, the charred barn site, the land she'd bled for. Then she looked at Gideon, and he was already shaking his head. "We're not running," he said. Briggs turned on him. "You'll die if you stay." "Then we die." "Gideon?" "No." Gideon's voice was hard as iron. "I've spent the last 3 years wishing I was dead. Wishing the rock slide had finished the job. But I'm not dead. I'm here. And I'm not going to spend whatever time I've got left running from men like Drayton." Briggs looked at Evelyn. "Talk some sense into him." Evelyn met Gideon's eyes, and she saw the resolve there, the refusal to bend, and she realized she felt the same way. "We're staying," she said. "You're both insane." "Maybe," Evelyn said, "but this is our land, our home, and if Drayton wants it, he's going to have to take it over our bodies." Briggs stared at them like they'd lost their minds. Then he sighed, long and heavy, and shook his head. "All right, if you won't leave, then at least let me help." "How?" Gideon asked. "I can't bring the law to you, not officially, but I can bring men. Good men who are tired of watching Drayton run roughshod over this valley. Give me 2 days and I'll come back with enough guns to make this a fair fight. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. You'd do that? I took an oath to protect people, Briggs said. That includes stubborn idiots who won't save themselves. Gideon smiled, sharp and dangerous. 2 days. 2 days, Briggs confirmed. And for the love of everything, don't die before I get back. He mounted his horse and rode off with his deputies, and Evelyn turned to Gideon. You think he'll come through? She asked. I think he'll try, Gideon said. But we'd better be ready in case he doesn't. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. Evelyn and Gideon worked like the world was ending, fortifying every weak point, stockpiling ammunition, and turning the house into a fortress that could withstand a siege. They moved the remaining cattle into the corral closest to the house, cleared every inch of cover from the approach, and set up additional firing positions on the roof and at the corners of the property. Gideon modified his chair one last time, adding thicker armor plating and a mechanism that let him lock the wheels in place so he could fire without the chair rolling backward from the recoil. He tested it obsessively, adjusting angles and tensions until Evelyn thought he'd wear the metal down to nothing. It's good enough, she said. It's not, Gideon said, tightening another bolt. Gideon, you've been working on that thing for 6 hours. It's good. He stopped and looked at her, his face drawn and tired. It has to be perfect, because if it's not, you die. And I can't... He stopped, his jaw working. I can't let that happen. Evelyn walked over and put her hand on his shoulder. Then we make sure it doesn't, together. Gideon nodded, and for the first time in days, some of the tension left his shoulders. That night, they ate dinner in silence, both of them too tired to talk. When Evelyn finished washing the dishes, she came back into the main room and found Gideon staring at the fire. What are you thinking about? She asked. About what comes after, he said. After what? After we win, assuming we do. Evelyn sat down beside him. What do you see? Gideon was quiet for a moment. I see a barn. A real one, like I promised. I see fences that don't need fixing every week and cattle that aren't half-starved. I see... He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. I see you. Happy. Safe. Not looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. What about you? What do you see for yourself? I see me building that barn, Gideon said, working with my hands, making something that lasts. He looked at her. I see me with you, if you'll have me. Evelyn's breath caught. Gideon? I know I'm not much, he said quickly. I can't walk. I can't do half the things a normal man could do, and I come with more baggage than any person should have to carry. But He stopped, swallowed hard. I love you, Evelyn. And if we make it through this, I want to spend whatever time I've got left proving it. Evelyn stared at him, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Then she leaned forward, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was fierce and desperate, and full of everything they'd been holding back for months. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. You're an idiot, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. I know. And I love you too. Gideon smiled, a real smile, wide and genuine and so full of relief it made her chest ache. He pulled her close, and they sat there by the fire, wrapped in each other, and pretended for just a little while that the world outside didn't exist. Briggs came back on the morning of the second day with 12 men. They rode into the yard armed and grim-faced, and Evelyn recognized a few of them. Ranchers from neighboring spreads, men who'd lost land or livestock to Drayton's schemes. Briggs dismounted and walked over to where Evelyn and Gideon were waiting. This is everyone I could round up on short notice, he said. It's not much, but they're good shots and they're angry. That counts for something. Evelyn looked at the men. They looked back, wary but determined. Thank you, she said. One of the ranchers, a grizzled man named Hank, spat into the dirt. Don't thank us yet. We might all be dead by sundown. Cheerful, Gideon muttered. Briggs pulled Evelyn aside. Drayton's men were spotted leaving town this morning. They'll be here within the hour. Are you ready? Evelyn looked at the ranch, the barricades, the firing positions, the carefully laid traps. Then she looked at Gideon, who was checking the sharps one last time. As ready as we're going to be, she said. Good. Briggs turned to his men. You all know what we're up against. Drayton's got numbers, but we've got position and we've got cause. Hold the line, don't waste ammunition, and for the love of everything, don't do anything stupid. The men nodded and Briggs sent them to their positions. Evelyn and Gideon took the porch. The Sharps locked and loaded and waited. The hour passed like a lifetime. Then Evelyn saw the dust rising on the horizon, and her heart started hammering in her chest. They're coming, she said. Gideon nodded, his face calm and hard. Let them come. Drayton rode at the front of the column with 30 armed men behind him. They came slow and deliberate, spread out in a wide line, and when they reached the edge of the property, Drayton raised his hand and the column stopped. He sat there on his horse, tall and confident, and looked at the ranch like he already owned it. Mrs. Cross, he called out, I'm giving you one last chance. Walk away now, and I'll let you live. Stay, and I'll burn this place to ash with you in it. Evelyn stepped to the edge of the porch, the shotgun in her hands. Go to hell, Drayton. Drayton smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He raised his hand and his men started forward. Here we go, Gideon muttered. The first shots came from the ridge, Briggs's men opening fire from cover. 3 of Drayton's riders went down immediately, and the rest scattered, firing back wild. Evelyn raised the shotgun and fired into the mass of men, and someone screamed. Gideon Sharps roared and a rider fell from his horse, the animal bolting into the chaos. He reloaded and fired again, each shot precise and devastating. Drayton's men tried to charge the house, but the barricades slowed them, funneling them into the kill zone. Gideon picked them off one by one, and the men behind the barricades added their fire to his. Bodies started piling up, and the charge broke. They're pulling back, one of Briggs's men shouted. But Drayton wasn't done. He rallied his men, screaming orders, and they regrouped for a second push. This time, they came from 2 sides, trying to split the defense. East flank! Gideon shouted, swinging the Sharps around. Evelyn ran to the corner of the porch and fired at the men coming from the east. The shotgun kicked hard, her shoulder screaming in protest, but she kept firing until the barrel was too hot to touch. Reload, Gideon yelled. She fumbled with the shells, her hands slick with sweat, and got the gun loaded just in time to see a man clear the barricade and sprint toward the house. She fired, and he went down hard, sliding to a stop 5 feet from the porch. Gideon's rifle cracked again and again, the sound like thunder, and every shot found its mark. But there were too many. They kept coming, wave after wave, and Evelyn could feel the defense starting to crack. We can't hold them, Hank shouted from the ridge. Yes, we can, Briggs yelled back. Hold the damn line! A bullet punched through the porch rail next to Evelyn's head, and she dropped flat, her heart slamming against her ribs. She crawled to the barrels, raised the shotgun, and fired blind. Gideon was still shooting, his face set in grim concentration, but she could see the strain in his shoulders, the way his hands were starting to shake. Gideon, fall back, she shouted. Not yet. Another wave hit, and this time they made it to the porch. Evelyn swung the shotgun like a club, catching one man in the jaw and sending him sprawling. Another one lunged at her, and she fired point blank, the blast deafening. Then she heard Gideon scream. She spun and saw a man on top of him, a knife flashing in the firelight. Gideon was struggling, trying to throw him off, but the man was bigger, stronger. Evelyn didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the pistol from her belt, ran across the porch, and shot the man in the back. He collapsed on top of Gideon, and she shoved him off, her hand shaking so bad she could barely hold the gun. Are you all right? She gasped. Gideon nodded, breathing hard. Yeah. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. She helped him back into his chair, and they both turned to face the yard. The attack was faltering. Drayton's men were scattering, retreating toward the ridge, and Briggs's men were picking them off as they ran. Evelyn saw Drayton himself trying to rally them, but it was no use. The fight was over. And then she heard hooves. She looked up and saw a line of riders coming from the south, more men, at least 15 of them, all armed and moving fast. No, she breathed. Gideon swore. Where the hell did they come from? But as the riders got closer, Evelyn saw the badge on the lead rider's chest. Federal Marshals. They swept into the yard like a storm, surrounding Drayton's men and cutting off their escape. The lead marshal, a hard-faced man with a scar across his cheek, rode straight up to Drayton and leveled a rifle at his chest. Carl Drayton, he said, You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and attempted murder. Drop your weapon." Drayton stared at him, his face going white. Then he dropped his gun. The marshals rounded up what was left of his men, and the fight ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Evelyn stood on the porch, the shotgun hanging loose in her hands, and watched as Drayton was hauled off his horse and shackled. Briggs rode up, grinning like a fool. "Told you I'd handle it." Evelyn almost laughed. "You cut that pretty close." "Yeah, well, timing's everything." She looked at Gideon, and he was smiling too. Tired, bloody, but smiling. And in that moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. The cleanup took days. The marshals took statements, cataloged evidence, and hauled Drayton and his men off to face trial in the territorial court. Briggs stayed to help, along with Hank and the other ranchers, and together they started repairing the damage. It wasn't easy. The ranch had been torn apart by the fighting, bullet holes in the walls, barricades scattered everywhere, blood soaked into the dirt. But piece by piece, they put it back together. One afternoon, Evelyn was hauling timber for the new barn when Gideon rolled up beside her. "You need help?" he asked. "You can't lift timber from a chair." "Watch me." He grabbed one end of a beam, braced it against the arm of his chair, and started pulling. Evelyn grabbed the other end, and together they dragged it into position. It wasn't graceful, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but it worked. "See?" Gideon said, grinning. "Told you I'd build you a barn." Evelyn laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. "You're insane." "Yeah, but you love me anyway." "Yeah," Evelyn said, leaning down to kiss him. "I do." Over the next few weeks, the barn took shape. Gideon designed it, directed the construction, and did as much of the work as he could from his chair. The other ranchers helped, and slowly, the structure rose from the ashes of the old one, stronger, bigger, and built to last. On the day they raised the final beam, Evelyn stood in the doorway and looked at what they'd built. It wasn't perfect. The lines were a little crooked, and there were gaps in the siding that would need patching, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful. Gideon rolled up beside her. "What do you think?" "I think it's the best damn barn I've ever seen," Evelyn said. "Good, because I'm not building another one." She laughed and took his hand, and they stood there together, looking at the life they'd fought so hard to keep. The wedding happened in the spring. It was small, just Briggs, Hank, a few of the ranchers, and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. They held it in the yard, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and Evelyn wore a dress she'd borrowed from Mary Hollis. Gideon wore his best shirt and looked nervous as hell. "You ready?" Evelyn asked. "No," Gideon said, "but I'm doing it anyway." The ceremony was short and simple. Evelyn promised to love him, honor him, and not murder him when he got stubborn. Gideon promised the same. And when the preacher told them to kiss, Gideon pulled her down into his lap and kissed her like the world was ending. Everyone cheered. Afterward, they had a meal: roast beef, potatoes, bread that Hank's wife had baked. And Briggs made a toast that was half sincere and half jokes about how stubborn they both were. "Here's to the widow who wouldn't quit and the cripple who wouldn't die," he said, raising his glass. "May you both live long enough to regret this decision." Everyone laughed, and Evelyn clinked her glass against Gideon's. "Think we will?" she asked quietly. "Regret it?" Gideon shook his head. "Not a chance." The ranch grew over the years. Evelyn and Gideon worked it together, building it into something bigger and stronger than it had ever been. They bought more cattle, expanded the grazing land, and hired hands to help with the work. Gideon became known throughout the valley as the best leather worker and gunsmith for 100 miles, and people came from all over to buy his work. He built a workshop in the barn, fitted with ramps and workbenches he could reach from his chair, and spent his days crafting saddles, holsters, and custom rifles that became legendary in their own right. Evelyn ran the ranch, managed the business, and made sure everything ran smooth. They fought sometimes, loud, vicious fights about money or decisions, or just the sheer stress of keeping everything together. But they always made up, and they never went to bed angry. One night, 5 years after the wedding, Evelyn sat on the porch with Gideon and looked out at the land. "You ever think about how close we came to losing all of this?" she asked. "Every day," Gideon said. "You ever regret it? Staying? Fighting?" He looked at her, and his eyes were soft. "Not once." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. Me neither. They sat there in the quiet, and Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been when this all started, scared, alone, one bad week away from giving up. And she thought about the man they'd dumped on her porch, broken and bitter and ready to die. Neither of them was that person anymore. They'd been forged by fire, tempered by pain, and what came out the other side was something stronger than either of them could have been alone. You know what I think? Evelyn said. What? I think the town did me a favor when they dumped you on me. Gideon smiled. Yeah? Yeah, best mistake they ever made. He laughed, and the sound was warm and real and full of life. Years later, when people in the valley told stories about the widow and the cripple who'd stood against Carl Drayton, they always got the details wrong. Some said Evelyn had fought off 50 men single-handed. Others claimed Gideon could shoot a man from a mile away without missing. A few swore the whole thing had been exaggerated, that it couldn't have happened the way people said. But the ones who knew, the ranchers who'd fought beside them, the marshals who'd seen the aftermath, the townspeople who'd watched them rebuild, they knew the truth. It wasn't about the guns or the fights or the blood. It was about two people who'd been broken by the world and refused to stay that way. It was about choosing to stand when it would have been easier to fall. It was about finding strength not in perfection, but in the stubborn refusal to give up. And it was about love, not the soft, easy kind, but the kind that got forged in fire and came out stronger for it. Evelyn Cross and Gideon Hale became legends in their own time. But the legend wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the life they built together. The ranch that stood as proof of what two people could accomplish when they refused to quit, and the quiet truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, because the world had tried to bury them both, and they dug their way out together. On a warm summer evening, 20 years after the day Evelyn had claimed Gideon at the auction, they sat on the porch of the house they'd rebuilt and looked out at the empire they'd created. The ranch stretched for miles now, green pastures, strong fences, barns filled with livestock and equipment. They employed 15 hands, and the brand they'd created was known and respected throughout the territory. Gideon's hair was more gray than brown now, and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they were still strong. Evelyn's face was lined with years of sun and work, but her eyes were sharp and bright. You think we did all right? Gideon asked. Evelyn looked at him. All right? Yeah, with all of this. With us. She thought about the question, about the years of struggle and triumph, the fights and the laughter, the moments of doubt and the moments of perfect clarity. I think, she said slowly, that we took the hand we were dealt and turned it into something nobody thought was possible. I think we proved that broken doesn't mean finished, and I think... She paused, her voice catching. I think we loved each other the way people should, fierce and real and without apology. Gideon took her hand and squeezed it. That's a hell of an answer. It's a hell of a life. They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Evelyn thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment. The world had tried to break them. The world had tried to take everything they had, but they'd refused to break. They'd refused to surrender. And in the end, that refusal had been enough. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by the strongest or the smartest or the luckiest. Sometimes they're won by the people who simply refuse to quit. The people who look at impossible odds and say, not today. The people who take their broken pieces and build something beautiful anyway. Evelyn Cross had been a widow with nothing. Gideon Hale had been a cripple everyone had given up on. Together, they'd become something the world couldn't ignore. And their story, messy, imperfect, and absolutely true to who they were, lived on long after they were gone. A reminder that the human spirit, when pushed to its breaking point, has a choice. Break, or become unbreakable. They chose the latter, and that made all the difference.